In the previous video in this series, I covered my all-time favorite season of Infinity Train. In that video, I specifically covered Blake and why I believe that she is my favorite Infinity Train protagonist, with specific mentions to her arc, the allegory at play with her character, and her relatability to me personally. While I maintain all of those points to this day, I would argue that Book 3 has the most interesting and consistently high-quality set of main characters out of all seasons, Season 2 included. That said, I also said in the last video that Book 3 is the darkest season yet. So that only means... oh shit. The third season of Infinity Train aired in August 2020, only 7 months after the second season. While Season 2 had some of the single best animated shots in the entire series, Season 3 doesn't have any particular shots that are as impressive or high quality as the best shots in Season 2. This is probably because Infinity Train Season 3 aired in August of 2020, and we had bigger concerns at the time. Still, while not quite as good as Season 2, calling it a downgrade is nowhere near fair, since the animation overall is still as good as always. However, ignoring the pandemic fundamentally altering many aspects of day-to-day life and modern-day workforces as we know it, there was another change behind the scenes at this time. When Season 3 dropped, it was released on HBO Max. This is due to the fact that during the pandemic, Warner Bros. Discovery created a streaming platform in order to compete with the likes of Netflix and Disney+. So, naturally, hot off the heels of their new streaming platform, they launched the third season of Infinity Train exclusively on HBO Max. Yes, exclusively. But that's a point for another day. The third season of Infinity Train, in my mind, is the most important series in terms of the show's identity and wider reputation. Up until now, Infinity Train has been the reverse of most other Cartoon Network shows. Instead of being goofy with a side of mature topics, it was mature with a side of goofiness. However, Season 3, without spoiling things right away, is more in line with something like BoJack Horseman, which starts off really silly and goofy, but by the midway point, a lot of the comedy chips off, and you're left with a bleak depiction of these characters and identity struggles wherein you begin to wonder whether or not the main characters can be redeemed. More importantly, you wonder whether or not the characters deserve to be redeemed. Keep in mind, I just compared Infinity Train Season 3's emotional weight and resonance against BoJack Horseman. We are in for a treat with this one. We have a lot to talk about, perhaps the most of any other season of this show, so without further ado, let's get into it. The season opens with a musical number, of all things, wherein we get a flyover of the Apex, the fanatical anarchy group of passengers from the last season. In this number, which talks about the acceptance of differences, we get to see the two main characters of this season. Grace, the de facto leader of the Apex, and Simon, the cold calculating right-hand man. We also get to see some of their interests, like Grace being into fashion and being a good dancer, and Simon being a Warhammer 40k player. The musical number ends with the Apex raiding the car, terrorizing the troop of denizens, and lighting the car ablaze. Grace and Simon share this moment of banter, juxtaposed with the burning background, and when they all have had their fill, they take a bow, activating the door and leading them to the next car. Roll intro card. This is, without a doubt, my favorite opener to any season of Infinity Train. While the past two were good, and the opening for the next season has some of my favorite framing in the entire show, this opener does everything right. It sets up this cheery, uplifting, and jaunty mood that was present in the last season with the musical number, reintroduces us to our two main characters and their general personalities and dynamic, and completely flips what we would expect our protagonists to act like, fully cementing that this season is going to be very different from each of the other seasons. This tone continues with Grace and Simon taking inventory of their haul from the theater car, where Grace callously uses a denizen as a mirror before deciding that her cape is too much and instructs the Apex kid to throw it to the wheels. Simon, however, ultimately decides to save the denizen and use it as a lamp for his TRPG game. The dictionary defines dehumanization as this episode goes out of its way to show just how kindless and apathetic these two are, as well as how kindless this entire group is to denizens on the train. But it also reinforces that Grace and Simon do still have some capacity for compassion. Not for the denizens, good lord, not for the denizens, but rather, they have compassion for each other. This is also a good thing to note and get it out of the way early, but we need to talk about Grace and Simon's relationship, and I do use that word intentionally. While there is nothing official in the text of the show, Grace and Simon's relationship, depending on your viewpoint, can either be read as platonic best friends or as romantic partners. There was the deleted scene of Grace and Simon sharing an awkward first kiss, but given that that scene was cut, I don't think it can really count for this conversation. Still, it is an interesting aspect to the dynamic that I would be remiss if I didn't mention. We will see later that Simon does have some semblance of feelings towards Grace, but we don't get anything near the same from Grace. So I personally see it as Simon having a crush on Grace, but Grace not reciprocating the feeling. That's just how I personally read it though, and I encourage you to keep this aspect of their dynamic in mind when considering their future actions. Hot off the heels of their success, the two decide to raid one more car, the unfinished car from season 1. Side note, this joke slays me every single time I see it.
It's not really breaking in when your house has no walls.
After causing a bit of mayhem, the car begins to close off so that it can shift positions on the train. Simon gets trapped in a gravity well and Grace stays behind to try and save him, trapping them both in the car that is now stranded far away from their base. Interestingly, as the two are escaping, Grace avoids hitting one of the turtle denizens, which in turn causes her grapple line to fray and snap, nearly leading to Simon falling off the train and getting wheeled. Luckily, Grace is there to save him, and the two press on to head back to their base. In the following car, they find themselves in a moderately sized
audio jungle,
where a lot of the terrain glows and plays musical notes on contact. We get this brief scene where the two just traverse the car, playfully and harmlessly. This scene is set to a song titled A Little Extra Flair, which is my second favorite song in the entire show behind Cracked Reflection from last season. I don't talk about it much, but in general, the music for this show, specifically the songs done by Chrome Canyon, are tremendous, and each song helps reinforce the given tone perfectly. This is true in Season 1, Season 2, and right here in Season 3 with this short, cute, and fun scene. The two are then alerted by a sound that's this weird blend of a horn and an animal's roar that reverberates throughout the entire train car. After crashing through the forest, causing multiple trees to timber, the two make camp and try to capture the beast. Instead, the beast sneaks up and snatches both of them, and we see this terrifying, monstrous force that viciously attacked the two. A funny gorilla with tubas on its shoulders and a small kid. This kid is named Hazel, and the tuba gorilla is named, wait for it, Tuba.
Daring today, aren't we?
Upon seeing a little girl with a denizen, or rather, seeing a little girl with a null, Grace and Simon immediately burst into their song and dance routine to try to get Hazel to join the Apex. Simon gets laughed off by Hazel and scared off by Tuba, who acts as this sort of maternal figure to Hazel. However, Grace, being a more warm and open person, is able to make better contact with Hazel. In the process of explaining everything about how the train works to this seemingly oblivious kid, Grace finds that Hazel has a number. Technically, every single passenger is given a glowing number corresponding to their progress on the train, but Hazel's number is completely dark, lacking any light like a blown-out Arby's sign. Seeing an easy layup for a problem that the Apex could fix, Hazel and Tuba agree to accompany the two back to base. The next episode mainly serves as a background episode, where we learn bits and pieces about Grace, Simon, and Tuba's pasts. As the four go through the cars on their way back to base, Grace and Simon start to strategize on how best to indoctrinate Hazel while also getting rid of Tuba, which is tricky given how attached they are to each other. Grace says it won't be easy, comparing it to when Simon was attached to a certain Null, which visibly upsets him. After a little bit of Grace and Simon gaslighting and manipulating a 6-year-old, no, there is no context to make that sound better, the four leave the car while Tuba sings a song to Hazel. It's a song she used to sing to her kids before each of them passed away. We do not learn how or when they died, only that they did. The song itself is not important and never comes up again, but I thought it was a cute bonding moment for Tuba and Hazel, so I thought I would mention it. The four then enter a car that looks like a mashup between Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast with this really pleasant gold and royal blue color pattern. The condition for leaving this car is that they have to enter high society and debut at this ball. In order to do this, they need to dress up and learn how to dance, which Grace and Simon are quick to bemoan and try to circumvent. Hazel insists on learning the dance, insisting that, as per her earlier manipulation, she can be special and be brave too. Seeing Hazel, this child who looks up to her, trying to learn this dance in order to impress Grace, causes her to budge, and she plays by the rules while sending Simon to cover their bases and look for an alternative path. While learning the dance, Grace opens up a little bit about her history with her mom, and how strict she was with Grace's dancing. When Grace asks if Hazel had anything similar to that before the train, Hazel can't remember. When I said we learn about each character's pasts earlier, there was a reason why I left out Hazel. For some reason, she cannot remember anything about her life before the train. When I first watched this season, I thought this could be the reason why her number is dimmed. Given that she can't remember anything about her past life, naturally, she wouldn't know what she needs to do in order to improve herself based on her actions in the real world. Regardless of theories, Grace talks about her dance experience to try and cheer Hazel up. She relates Hazel's current desire to not be lonely and be surrounded by other kids with her own loneliness that she felt growing up with private instruction from tutors and coaches that her rich parents paid for. And when she was older and finally put into group instruction, she never made those early connections to the other kids, so she was still left out and lonely in the end. But it's fine. They were probably just jealous because Grace was the best, so really, it's fine that they exclude her. It's fine. Everything's fine. It's fine. This scene helps flesh out why Grace is the way that she is. Her family put so much pressure on her to be the best that she ended up sheltered from the outside world. Now that she is free on the train and met people who actually appreciate and look up to her, she is eager to please, but she also now has an overabundance of pride and egotism. Given her past loneliness, seeing that she now has cultivated an environment where she is constantly surrounded by kids and teens, making her this cult leader, it honestly is a little bit sad. Simon rejoins the group, saying there is no other way out, so there is only one thing left to do. They each learn the dance. This scene then leads to a cute moment between Grace and Simon ballroom dancing, with Simon blushing up a storm while Grace leads them through the dance. They all then dress up, do the dance to the audience, and debut themselves as high society socialites, after which Hazel has officially proven herself and is now a member of the Apex. But afterwards, Grace visibly seems troubled by this experience, causing her number to go down. Given how last episode gave us crumbs of Simon, Tuba, and unknown Hazel lore, but mainly focuses on Grace, now it's Simon's turn for an episode centered on him. The four find themselves in a snowy forest car, and after a snowball fight scene where Simon dies...
Wait! Armistice! Armistice!
It starts to storm in the car. Hard. So they eventually lead themselves into this lodge, where with the storm raging outside, Simon starts to talk about his past. Just him, Grace, Hazel, and Tuba, and absolutely no one else.
Motherfucker!
Okay, so I don't know how clear I have made this over the last 2 episodes, but I do not care for the cat much at all. They are definitely at their best this season for reasons we will get to later, but in general, I think outside of season 1, where she was an okay morally ambiguous character, she's kind of pointless and not very interesting. So what really happens is that the storm picks up, they find the lodge to hunker down in, and that lodge is occupied by the cat. The moment the cat and Simon see each other, Simon immediately gets startled and becomes incredibly closed off and short-tempered, especially towards the cat. After electing to stay, despite Simon's beef with the cat, Simon looks for supplies in the cat's storm room, which has a bunch of miscellaneous items like the tic-tac-toe board from that one very messed up season 1 episode, a taxidermy gum, and a crudely carved and painted figurine that Simon takes a special note of. After seeing the cat try to help Hazel make tea, one of Hazel's many Britishisms, Simon completely erupts at the cat. Turns out, the crumb about how Simon used to have a null of his own? Yeah, that was the cat. The two used to travel together for months until, when running from a gome, the cat abandoned Simon. It was only thanks to Grace saving him that he's alive right now, which also explains a lot of Simon's admiration for Grace. But that doesn't register right now. After all, Grace is making everyone stay in the cabin to wait out the storm, and that's causing Simon to relive all of the pain and trauma of that incident. Grace apologizes to Simon, saying that she's been distant because her number is, mysteriously, going down, which loops back around to Grace's need for approval. The two make up, and after finding out that all of the water in the car, and by extension all of the snow in the car, is sentient and just trying to play along with the snowball fight from earlier, they call a ceasefire and the blizzard ends. The four leave the cabin, but things are not resolved between Simon and the cat. Simon may have outlasted the situation, but he didn't actually deal with any of the problems attached to the situation, meaning his number doesn't go down like Grace's. The four leave and continue towards the base on a relatively solemn note.
Au revoir.
As episode 3 was Grace's episode, and as episode 4 was Simon's, this episode is now Tuba's. Even though she doesn't have many episodes that focus on her specifically, she still has some of the most development out of any of the animal side characters in this show. Atticus in season 1 didn't really grow or change as a character much at all. Alan Dracula in season 2 didn't need to change or grow at all because he was already perfect, and season 4 is an outlier. If it weren't for the sheer comedy and insanity of Alan Dracula, Tuba would easily be my favorite supporting character in this show. As is, though, she's a decent second place. As the four press on, Simon and Tuba start to bicker. Again. While Grace does her typical diplomacy, Simon pulls her aside to tell her that since they are close to the base, they should get rid of Tuba. The mood is joking and light at first, but as Simon continues to press the issue, Grace becomes more and more adamant that they are not going to hurt Tuba. Or in other words, Simon is not going to hurt Tuba. The card that they have to clear is the color clock car, a car with a different lock and set of terrain based on what time it is, as per the color clock. Since teamwork is imperative to solve the puzzle, the four split into teams of 2. However, Hazel, being absolutely adorable, wants to be on a team with Grace. Not a problem. That means Grace will go with Hazel, and Simon will go with... Oh, I see the problem.
Oh, do ya?
Things go relatively smoothly on Grace and Hazel's end, with the only problem being that Hazel is pushing back against Grace's comments about nulls and denizens. Grace ultimately relents a little, saying Tuba is, quote, one of the good ones, a sentence that has never been used to push narratives of exceptionalism ever. On Simon and Tuba's end, things go a lot rougher. The two are constantly bickering, and Tuba keeps bumping into the terrain and pointing out terrain that doesn't even exist. When the two accidentally end up in Blurple jail, Tuba is able to bust the two of them out pretty easily, which then leads to the two of them starting to grow closer. Tuba then opens up about Bugle, her deceased daughter that she name-dropped in a previous argument with Simon. Eventually, as the two go on, Simon catches on that Tuba is red-green colorblind, meaning that this entire time she's been confusing the terrain. Using this factor, the two start working together, and the two are able to solve the puzzle, and the four of them leave, closer than ever. And then the car starts to shift. The same way that Grace and Simon got stranded last time, the car starts to shift again, threatening to undo all of their progress. The four rush to the next car over, but Tuba and Hazel get trapped on the shifting car. Tuba throws Hazel across to safety, but nearly falls herself. As Grace and Hazel go ahead, Simon, the only one with a grapple pack, goes back for Tuba, and he is successful in his task. His original task.
But you're no person.
When Simon goes back to the other two, he proudly states that Tuba is dead, and that he killed her, and that Hazel doesn't have to worry about her anymore. This pisses off and disgusts Grace, but more importantly, it completely devastates Hazel, and she runs off crying. When Grace finds her again, she is sobbing, but moreover, she's changing shape into this half-person, half-turtle creature, similar to the unfinished car's denizen, which just so happens to be the car that ended up right next to the jungle car from episode 2. She was a denizen this entire time. When this season was originally airing, it dropped in 2 batches of 5 episodes, 10 episodes total, and on my first watch through, I was sure that Simon was going to save Tuba, because that's just what he was supposed to do. In a show about growth and change, I honestly, truly expected Simon to grow and change. But that's just how a typical cartoon would go. And as last season indicated, this is not a typical cartoon. On rewatch, it's so easy to see that Simon isn't going to save Tuba. Sure, Lake killed Mace last season, so the concept of the protagonist of a season killing someone isn't new, but with Grace, she killed out of self-defense. Simon killed Tuba because he wanted to, because he could, because he genuinely, honestly believed it was right. Knowing what I know about his character and where it is heading, it is so easy to see all of the warning signs, but in the moment, I truly had hope for Simon's development. And now that he has done something this callous and heinous, his development is arguably even more interesting. The next episode mainly serves as a breather from last episode. Opening exactly where it left off, Hazel is a panicked mess between her new form and losing Tuba, and it is just heartbreaking to see. Grace is able to talk Hazel through it all, and she is able to revert back to her more human form, all while Grace has conflicting feelings about Hazel, the girl she bonded with for the first half of this season, being one of the dreaded gnolls that the Apex is against. Grace, upon both of them being scared of what Simon might do to Hazel if he finds out she's a denizen, elects to keep her a secret, and the two proceed. When the two return to Simon, Grace immediately yells at Simon, pulling rank on him and commanding him not to take action unless she tells him to. The three make their way through the forest car, and before they leave, Hazel wants to hold a funeral for Tuba. Simon is outraged by this idea, but the two are able to spin it in a way where Simon agrees. I mean, I'm pretty sure Grace would have beaten the dog shit out of him if he argued, but hey, peaceful conflict resolution. Eventually, fed up with Hazel, the 6-year-old, being uncharacteristically indecisive, Simon gets pissed and goes back to the exit. Grace calls out that Simon isn't even showing a little bit of empathy, which is crazy given how 2 episodes ago he was having an entire angst session over how the cat left him. Simon's biggest character flaw is his narcissism. When the cat left him while the two were running for their lives, Simon was wronged, and ultimately he never forgives the cat. But when he goes out of his way to kill Tuba, Hazel's maternal figure, and the only person Hazel has ever known for most of her life, Simon believes that he didn't do anything wrong. While he is absolutely in the right for feeling abandoned by the cat, because he was, he is incapable of believing himself capable of inflicting an even greater sense of loss in another person. Back to Grace and Hazel. Hazel finally finds a spot to hold the funeral. A spot high up in the trees, like in the jungle car where they used to live. Having a musical rock from the car as the stand-in for Tuba's body, Hazel lists all of the things that she loved about Tuba, highlighting not just Hazel's innocence, but how kind and loving Tuba was. She also thanks Tuba's kids for letting her have Tuba so that Tuba can experience motherhood again, and how that Tuba can be with them now since she can't be with Hazel anymore. Grace then attempts to do the same thing Hazel did by listing out all the things that were good about Tuba, and as she does, she slowly realizes just how sorry she is that Tuba is gone, eventually tearing up, which serves as the first crack in her fanatical worldview of denizens and the train. As one final gut punch, the funeral ends with a song, a familiar song from earlier.
Don't be a worry, baby. No need to hurry, baby, when you're with me. Don't run way up ahead. Take the long way instead. There's lots to see. When you slow down to listen, and you won't go amiss in chances to play. We'll always have tomorrow. No need to let it borrow time from today. So don't be a worry, baby. No need to hurry, baby, when you're with me. Just take it easy peasy, my little lemon squeezy. You're always with me.
When I think of this season, this is the scene that I think about the most. It's just this quiet lullaby sung by a 6-year-old, mourning the loss of the only mother she has ever known, as she prepares to live the rest of her life without her. There are no backing instrumentals, no backing vocals, just this small kid singing with the only other noise being the sounds of wind and nature around her. Every time I see it, if I'm not already tearing up from the scenes beforehand, the shot of Hazel crying as she sings, ending with the shot of tears dripping down Grace's face, always gets me. It is the saddest moment in the entire show, and it fully earns it. The two proceed to the next car, and on the way, they pass by— What the fuck?
What have you kids been doing to the train cars?
British! Amelia, the false conductor from the first season, yells at Grace, Simon, and Hazel, remarking how they've only been in the car for a minute and there's already a glitch in the car's code. They eventually piece together that Amelia was sent by 1-1, the true conductor of the train, in order to serve as a helper and maintenance worker for the cars. Simon, being the only one still deep into the Apex's dogma, is quick to get defensive and antagonistic to Amelia, which she quickly laughs off. She explains what she's doing and why she is pissed at the three of them, in the process taking off her equipment and revealing her number, which used to cover her arms, torso, and neck, but now only covers her left arm, torso, neck, and half of her right arm. Progress. Turns out that the scanner Simon made to track passengers was based on number and proximity to each other. He thought that the high number concentration in the car was the apex, when really it was Amelia, the person with the highest number on the train. At the same time, Amelia has been trying to repair cars that were failed versions of her attempts to live out her younger years with Ulrich, her former fiancé who passed away before her time on the train. The cars that she has been repairing include cars with abnormal college campuses, phone booths, turtles, too many turtles, a number of turtles that makes you think, why? Why are there so many turtles? Immediately picking up on what this means for Hazel, Grace pulls the two of them aside and tries to convince them all to leave. After pulling rank on Simon, again, the three make a break for it and they manage to escape Amelia. When they manage to catch a breath, Simon tries to look at everyone's numbers, in the process grabbing Grace's arm forcefully. At this point, Grace is fully sick of Simon's shit and goes off on him, again. Simon relents after this, but noticeably, he doesn't apologize. He just offers to stand outside and watch. Back to Hazel. After Simon killed Tuba, she has been noticeably more assertive and aggressive towards Simon. Rightfully so. After Simon grabbed Grace, though, Hazel is pissed that Simon was forceful with Grace. She feels the need to protect Grace as Tuba protected her. Grace comforts her, and Simon storms off outside of the car. With the help of his grapple pack, he eventually sprints all the way back to the cat's cabin car. Knowing that the cat is a collector of various gadgets, Simon demands something to tell him what's wrong with Grace. Again, not understanding that he is the reason why Grace is mad. Simon gives details on what's wrong with Grace, citing her number going down, her not wanting to fix it, and all of the recent stuff with Amelia. When the cat asks for details about Amelia, Simon just says,
Woman, how old is she?
How should I know? She's just old and British.
The cat is quick to remark that Grace was right to leave her, given the cat's past with Amelia. Moreover, the cat comments about numbers and how destroying things, hurting people, and playing soldier are all examples of what causes a number to go up. She then asks Simon what, inversely, would cause a number to go down. Fully entranced in the Apex's dogma, unwilling to consider his viewpoint as wrong, goes off on a tantrum, saying how Grace isn't acting how she's supposed to, and how she's shutting him out, how she is abnormal, not him. In one final attempt to get his way, he begs the cat for something to help him, dropping the cat's true name in the process, Samantha. In turn, she gives Simon some nanobots that are used to scan a passenger's memories and produce tape. And just like that, Simon leaves, with not as much as a thank you. This episode is the perfect microcosm of Simon's character. While he is incredibly smart, he is also incredibly immature and narcissistic. He is unable or unwilling to look at himself and his actions and see the error of his ways, even when presented with clear and sound logic that contradicts his own viewpoints. This is obviously a problem because if the train works by making someone work through their problems, and a person cannot even see their own problems due to their own ego and stubbornness, what are they supposed to do? Still, we see Amelia slowly shaving off a good chunk of her number, so there is still hope for Simon. Even though he is bigger than most of the other people on the train, at the end of the day, he is still just a kid, the most common type of passenger on the train. There is still hope that he can turn this around and improve. Right? The next episode opens with, really? That's the episode title? That's what we're going with? Okay, whatever. The next episode opens with Grace and Hazel waking up, with Hazel seemingly having better control over her turtle form. Grace insists that Hazel stop shifting because if Simon were here, he'd go ballistic. But Simon isn't here. Amelia is. After saving the two of them from a giant snake, the three sit down and talk. Now that they are cooperating, Amelia is completely civil, even a bit nice to the two of them, causing her number to go down a bit, much to her indifference given how high her number is. They leave the car and Simon catches back up with them, attacking Amelia on sight. When his slide tackle is blocked by a force field from Amelia's belt, Simon recognizes the red sine wave on the technology and demands to know why she is wearing their symbol. Amelia, again, laughs at this, saying how she was the one who was the fake conductor, which is true. Won't stop Simon's cognitive dissonance, though. Having no choice but to slow down so a bunch of falling rocks can fill the cavern and create a bridge, which, again, rock bridge car, the chasm car, the rift car, any of these? No, silly me. The rocks are saying hey, ho, and whoa as they fall, so naturally this is the hey, ho, whoa car. Having no choice but to slow down, Amelia explains her past as the false conductor, which Simon isn't having whatsoever. Amelia reinforces what Samantha said earlier, how the entire point is to work through your problems in order to get your number down to 0 so that you can return to the real world. But everybody is forgetting one crucial factor. Simon is always right, and therefore anyone who disagrees with him is immediately false and lying. When Amelia points out Simon's narcissism to his face, Simon tries to punch Amelia. He repeatedly tries to attack Amelia, causing Hazel to stress out and shift forms. Grace feigns surprise, and Amelia realizes that Hazel is what she was tracking all this time. Simon advises Grace to ditch Hazel, and Grace agrees. She agrees, calling Hazel a null. After all of the progress she has made, she backslides and gives into pressure, slipping back into her old ways. Immediately seeing how wrong it was, she elects to camp the night to wait for the chasm to fill, which is the last straw for Simon. When Grace is asleep, he uses Samantha's nanobots to scan Grace's memories, seeing that Grace has been keeping Hazel a secret from him this entire time. This is the thing to fully break him and fully shatter any image he had of Grace. When Grace wakes up, both Simon and Hazel are pissed at Grace. Grace tries to play middle of the road, saying that while Hazel is a denizen, she's also Apex, and that the Apex doesn't leave anybody behind. This fails for Simon, but it also fails for Hazel, who doesn't trust Grace anymore, and how despite calling themselves brave, the Apex is scared of her. She elects not to go with Grace, and instead goes with Amelia. Grace tries to apologize for what she did and what she said, but it's too late. Hazel has made up her mind, and she goes with Amelia, leaving things to just Grace and Simon again. But it wasn't like how it was before, because not only does Hazel not trust Grace anymore, Simon doesn't trust Grace anymore. The two find themselves in an origami-themed car. While Grace at the start of the season would have stomped on the birds or just teared them up for fun, she now steps around them, careful not to hurt any of them. Simon, on the other hand? Simon doesn't care. Simon hasn't changed, so the birds still get crushed anyways. Simon tries to get under Grace's skin with a few remarks, but Grace immediately counters this, saying that Simon doesn't know what he's talking about, slapping away his hand when he tries to touch her shoulder. Simon at this point is fully done, and uses Grace's tape from earlier to trap Grace in her memories. In these memories, we see Grace's old life before the train. We see her parents' high standards, we see her parents' lack of care when it came time for Grace to perform, we see Grace's isolation from her peers, we see it all. We also see the beginnings of Grace's behavior from the start of the show, manipulating the bullies in her dance troupe to turn against each other with just one well-placed sentence. In addition to rarely showing up to her performances, despite putting her through the training, we also see her parents, who are upper-class socialites, pawn Grace off to a nanny or sitter anytime she becomes an inconvenience. Finally, we see the memory that caused Grace to be picked up by the train. When she was younger, she stole a bracelet from a mall and got caught. When her parents came down to get her, she was almost immediately ignored, and the parents went straight to arguing with the security guards. Her parents do have a point. Grace wouldn't need to steal a bracelet she wants because her family can afford it perfectly well. But she didn't want the bracelet. She wanted to be seen by her parents and acted out in order to get some modicum of attention from them. But even shoplifting got her nothing. As an interesting lore tidbit, we also see that the train doesn't have one set look whenever it appears to people in the real world. Instead, it appears as something that would entice the passenger to board it. The tape then changes from simple flashbacks to Simon trying to manipulate Grace's memories in order to make her see things his way and see just how crazy she's been. We see a vision of how the false conductor looked in Grace's past in order to see what she based her cult on. At first, they're this massive, smoky, inky black mass of darkness, only lit by the red sine wave on their face. But that's not what Grace envisions the conductor as. That's what Simon envisions the conductor as. What Grace really remembers is the robotic mech suit that we are accustomed to seeing from season 1. But Simon believes that's a lie. Her memories were real when he agreed with them, but now that he disagrees, now they are nothing but lies. We then get a flashback of when Samantha abandoned Simon, and when Grace saved him. When the two stop to take their breath, a 10-year-old Simon notices a slightly older Grace's number. He then asks how it got so high, and Grace, finally getting the attention and admiration she always wanted, lies to Simon, saying she got it so high because she's, quote, really good at the train, treating it like a high score in a video game. We then get a montage of all the moments from Grace and Simon's shared past, including the slow build-up of their cult. Noticeably, in this memory, Simon is the main person who embellished the conductor, while Grace was the one who wanted people close by. Simon calls out Grace, calling her a liar for misleading so many people, and when Grace tries to defend herself, saying that she didn't lie, Simon sticks her in a loop of the moment Grace decided to keep Hazel's true form a secret, causing Grace to crumble. The episode ends with Grace still trapped in her memories, with Simon saying that it didn't have to be like this, and how Grace made him do this. This is again another highlight of Simon's toxic traits, but it is also something much worse. This specific type of gaslighting and victim blaming is most often used in toxic relationships, both platonic and romantic. If Grace and Simon ever were a thing, then this moment is the true nail in the coffin for their separation. With the episode over, Simon leaves her, a lifeless body in the origami car, completely alone. Still trapped in her worst memories, Grace is tormented by distortions of Hazel, Simon, and even herself, as she quite literally looks herself in the eyes to tell her just how wrong she is. And the real Grace agrees. She was wrong. She was afraid of being wrong, afraid of being enough, afraid of being alone. By truly looking herself in the eyes and acknowledging her problems, she is able to come to terms with herself and free herself from her tape. When she awakens, she sees some of the origami that Simon crushed and does her best to help repair the damages done to them, immediately starting herself on her path of self-improvement and making amends. She wipes the apex mark off of her face and moves forward. She eventually finds herself back at her base, the place she has been trying to reach this entire season. When she gets there, a group of Apex kids attack her and call her a void. She is surrounded by kids and confronted by Simon, who now takes the appearance of an emperor, fully leaning into his reputation as a cold-hearted and narcissistic tyrant. He has successfully taken control of the Apex and has branded Grace a void, which is a passenger who openly defies the leader and the Apex as a whole. And much like nulls, or any other threat to the Apex, they throw what they cannot control to the wheels. Grace tries to reason with the group, citing her own mistakes and how she is sorry and wants to make up for them, fully verbalizing just how far she has come. But Simon isn't allowing any of it. There's a line that, if it wasn't clear already, proves that Simon is a clinical narcissist. Why would I want to change if I'm always right? The two break out into a fight, and after several close calls, Grace finally says that she is sorry for her mistakes and her mistakes alone. She isn't responsible for Simon, his actions, or his happiness. She owes him nothing. But to Simon, she owes him everything. The fight is escalated by a Gome interrupting the fight, and Grace is able to fend both of them off. And as Simon falls due to a malfunctioning gravity boot, Grace catches him from his fall and saves his life once again. But that doesn't make any sense. Grace lied to Simon. She kept Hazel's secret from Simon. She tried to dissolve the Apex. She went against their ideology. None of this makes sense to Simon. She isn't a good person. She's a threat. She's a void. She needs to be wheeled. So Simon decides to do what he thinks is right. At this point, there's no redeeming Simon. Not only is he stubborn, unwilling to change, and overall incapable of admitting personal fault, but he is willing to usurp and overthrow anyone who disagrees with him. And even when the other person saves his life, he attempts to kill them in cold blood. Simon is a deeply tragic character because he is real. This type of behavior is real, whether it be in people who think they're above the minutiae of day-to-day civility, in couples with an abusive partner, in political leaders who think they are above the law. Simon's brand of narcissism is real. His transformation into a cackling monster with a number so high that it covers his entire body is haunting. But it gets even sadder when there's this brief moment where he starts to sob for Grace's demise, only to return to cackling a few seconds later. Even when he kills someone he has known for almost half of his life, someone he was best friends with, someone he may have had a crush on at one point, he is unable to see any fault in himself. He is dangerous. But more than anything, he is deeply troubled. And remembering he is only an 18-year-old makes it even worse. This is easily the most mature and dark single season of any Cartoon Network show I have ever seen. And I think it is all summarized with the final 5 minutes of this season. In this time frame, we see two best friends who grew up with each other, fighting against one another over fundamental ideological differences about the ethics and morality of the train. We see Grace spare Simon from his death, only to be instantly betrayed by Simon, nearly succeeding in fully killing her. This then prompts him to spiral into a mental breakdown as his entire body is covered in numbers, the most severe physical manifestation of one's sins that we will ever see in this show. The only reason Grace is able to survive is because she grew and changed as a person, prompting the creatures that she helped earlier to save her in turn. And finally, when a gum pounces on Simon and starts to kill him, he is left kicking and screaming with no one willing to help him, because his actions and his narcissism pushed any and all support he may have once had away. But as Simon starts to wither into dust, it's not some triumphant defeat of the manipulative villain, like something akin to Scar from The Lion King or Dr. Facilier from Princess and the Frog. In my mind, I don't see an evil villain getting turned to ash. I see a misguided and deeply troubled teenager who needed as much help as anyone else on the train, if not more so, die because he was unwilling to adapt and grow as a person. There is no triumph in seeing a mentally unwell individual meet their own end. Not in the real world, and certainly not here. And then, the final scene of the episode, where Grace goes back to the Apex, the cult that she and her former best friend started as a means to gain control over their lives. Grace disbands the group, saying how wrong she was for everything, while encouraging everyone else to do as she did. Learn from the train, learn their flaws, learn their problems, and overcome them with genuine growth and development. This final speech, in turn, causes a lot of the Apex to see the error of their ways, and it causes their numbers, as well as Grace's number, to go down, but nowhere near to zero. This is the most important part for me, because this is the only time in the series where a season doesn't end with the main character reaching zero and going back to the real world. While Grace did give up control of the Apex and dissolve the group, that act alone isn't enough to get her off the train. While the group that terrorized the train is gone, she still has all the damage of the group to make up for. As good of a first step as this is, it is not enough. Or at least, not yet. Because for as dark as this season was, I do believe that this ending is an optimistic one. Over the course of this season, we see two best friends who are both ingrained in their status in this cult and all of the power that comes with it. Over the course of this season, we see someone so disturbed that they are unwilling to break away from their persona and their actions that ultimately lead to their untimely young death. But on the other end, we see the other learn the error of their ways and slowly come to terms with their past and all of the actions they enabled and were responsible for. This theme of two parallel stories, one of wickedness and one of weakness, is also the core of my favorite musical album of all time, Damn by Kendrick Lamar. In both instances, in both the context of the media that we are consuming and in the context of the real world, we can either choose to descend further into darkness or confront the darkness head on in hopes of one day finding a light at the end. We can spiral into wickedness, or we can hold a mirror to our weakness. We can either choose to be like Simon, or we can choose to be like Grace. While Lake is the Infinity Train protagonist I identify the most with, Grace is the one that inspires me to constantly improve and forward myself to a better tomorrow and a better person. Infinity Train Season 3 is one of the most special and unique seasons of not just this show, but any TV show that I've seen, in my opinion. It is a season that takes a somewhat goofy show with mature themes and character arcs and completely bucks any pretense of silliness and creates a season that is tonally distinct from the rest of the series to a degree that I haven't seen anywhere else. While Season 2 is and likely will always be my favorite season, meaning that I derive the most enjoyment out of seeing it and could rewatch it the most times without getting sick of it, Season 3 has the best overall writing in the series. Season 3's story is not only more readily applicable to most people, but it is also a much deeper and mature story of letting go of ego and accepting that you are human, just like everyone else, a sentiment that we desperately need in today's day and age. On top of that, each season of Infinity Train usually has one character that I either don't really care for or actively dislike. Here, every character is interesting and compelling, even giving depth to one of my least favorite characters in the entire series. Additionally, as stated before, Grace is one of the best main protagonists in the series, only getting beat out by Lake for just how relevant she is to me specifically. Lastly, Simon is without a doubt the best antagonist in the series, and if I'm being honest, as great as Amelia was, Simon's arc completely blows the other villains out of the water. The arcs that each of the main characters in this season go through are some of the best in the entire series, to the point where I think Season 3 is the best encapsulation of the show's premise and core themes. And there we have it. That is Infinity Train Season 3. If this video is coming out when I want it to, it should release a year to the day of my very first video, wherein I covered Infinity Train Book 1. These videos that I've made over the past year have been some of my favorite pastimes, and watching these videos back, it's almost like a time capsule of each month. As much as I remember learning French 1 spring semester last year, I also remember those 3 months because that was the time I was working on my Pokemon X video. While I have only had one quote-unquote popular video, and that video also has its own set of audio issues, I am more than happy with my work and how far I feel I have progressed as a writer and as an editor. Inconsistent audio problems notwithstanding, of course. So, yeah. Happy 1 year. I have one other video planned for this month, my best of 2024 list, and then after that, we just have one more season of Infinity Train to cover. As fun as these videos have been, Infinity Train Season 4, out of all of the other prior seasons, is probably the most fun out of them all. More on this season to follow.